The last weekend of summer had always been special in Maplewood, a small town where everyone seemed to know each other's business, yet neighbors still waved with friendly smiles across their fences. Labor Day wasn't just another holiday on the calendar here. It was a tradition. Families prepared for days in advance, stocking up on charcoal picnic baskets and red, white, and blue decorations. The air buzzed with excitement, as if nothing bad could ever disturb this picture-perfect place. Children roamed the streets with sparklers in their hands, and music from backyard radios drifted through the neighborhood like an unofficial soundtrack to the holiday. On the surface, Maplewood looked like the kind of town where trouble simply didn't exist. But the truth was darker than the bright flags lining Main Street. James Miller stood at the edge of his driveway that morning, coffee mug in hand, greeting neighbors as they passed by. To anyone who looked at him, he was the embodiment of stability. He taught history at the local high school, coached the debate team, and volunteered at the library during summer breaks. His wife Claire admired his dedication to the community, and their teenage son saw him as a steady, if sometimes strict, presence at home. Together they seemed to form one of those families people quietly envied, a family that appeared untouched by scandal or sorrow. But James's outward charm was only part of the story. Behind the smile and the polite small talk, he was carrying a secret that would eventually tear everything apart. The town was full of plans that day. A parade would march through the center in the afternoon, followed by a picnic at the park, then fireworks by the lake to close out the night. Every family had their own little rituals, but everyone ended up in the same places, celebrating together. For the Millers, that meant starting the morning with Claire preparing her famous potato salad and James helping set up folding chairs in the backyard. Friends would stop by later, and for a while, it really did feel like the perfect holiday. Yet even as he carried coolers to the car and joked with his son about who could eat the most hot dogs, James's thoughts kept drifting elsewhere. Rachel Carter had moved to Maplewood less than a year earlier, renting a small house on the edge of town. She was new enough that people still referred to her as that young woman from the city. But she had blended in quickly, making casual conversation at the grocery store and attending local events. Still, there was something about her that stood out, an air of independence that set her apart from the long-time residents. James had noticed her during a community fundraiser months ago, and one chance encounter had led to another. By the time summer arrived, the two were entangled in a secret that neither could fully control. As James carried out his duties that morning, he replayed the moments he had shared with Rachel. The thrill of meeting in places where no one could see them, the promises whispered late at night, the dangerous sense of living a double life. It had been intoxicating. He told himself it was temporary, that he could handle both worlds without consequence. But now, on this bright September day, with neighbors smiling all around him, and his wife humming a tune in the kitchen, the walls of his carefully constructed life felt like they were closing in. Claire, unaware of her husband's distractions, was focused on making the day perfect. She arranged the picnic dishes with precision, laughed at her son's jokes, and chatted with friends who dropped by to wish them a happy holiday. She had no reason to suspect that beneath James's calm surface was a man preparing for a confrontation that could destroy them all. To her, this was just another Labor Day, another chance to build memories before the busy school year began. The town carried on with its celebrations, each moment adding to the illusion of safety. Children practiced for the parade, brass instruments blaring off key as proud parents clapped. Vendors prepared cotton candy and popcorn stands by the park. Couples held hands as they walked along the decorated streets. Nothing about the day suggested that it would end in tragedy. Yet fate has a way of hiding danger in plain sight, allowing ordinary hours to slip by unnoticed until everything changes in a single moment. As the sun climbed higher, James glanced toward the horizon. The fireworks show by the lake would come later that evening, a highlight of the holiday he had attended every year since childhood, but this year would be different. Rachel had made it clear that she was tired of waiting in the shadows, and James knew she expected an answer. He had told her he would find a moment to talk during the celebrations, a promise that filled him with both dread and anticipation. What he didn't realize was that Claire's careful world was already cracking, and the town's perfect holiday was about to be remembered for something no one would ever forget. James Miller's secret had begun quietly, almost innocently, though nothing about it could be called innocent now. The first time he spoke to Rachel Carter was at a school fundraiser in the spring. She had been helping serve food at one of the booths, her laughter carrying above the noise of children playing games and parents counting raffle tickets. James had stopped to thank her, and one conversation turned into another. What should have remained small talk grew into something heavier, something far riskier than either of them had expected. Rachel was unlike anyone James had known in Maplewood. She was younger, restless, and carried with her an energy that felt foreign in the quiet rhythms of the town. She had left the city behind, claiming she wanted a slower life, but her restlessness was still visible in the way she spoke, the way she seemed always on the edge of wanting more. For James, who had been living inside the safe but predictable patterns of teaching, parenting, and being a husband, Rachel represented possibility. She was excitement wrapped in secrecy, and he convinced himself that the danger of being discovered was part of what made it feel alive. By early summer their meetings had become routine. They chose places far from prying eyes, an abandoned barn off a country road, the far end of the lake where few people ever ventured, or sometimes just inside Rachel's small rented house with the blinds pulled tightly shut. Each encounter added another layer of guilt, but also another thread of attachment. James told himself that he still loved Claire, that this was just a distraction, but Rachel didn't see it that way. To her, their connection was more than stolen passion. It was a chance at a future she believed she deserved. The more time passed, the more insistent she became. At first, she was content with the secrecy, understanding that James had a family to protect. But as the months went by, her patience began to unravel. She pressed him for answers, asking when he would tell Claire, when he would stop pretending to live two lives. James deflected, always finding reasons to delay. The new school year was starting soon. His son needed stability. Claire had been under stress lately. Excuses stacked on top of one another, each one buying him a little more time, but none of them satisfying Rachel. By the time Labor Day approached, her frustration had reached its breaking point. She told him in sharp, uncompromising terms that she would not spend another holiday hidden in the shadows. If he truly cared for her, he needed to prove it. If he didn't, then she would make the truth known herself. Her words lingered in his mind like a threat, even as he tried to convince himself that she was only speaking out of emotion. Yet James knew Rachel well enough by now to understand that she meant every word. On the morning of the holiday, while Claire busied herself in the kitchen preparing for their guests, James slipped into his study and checked his phone. There were 3 new messages from Rachel. None of them sounded patient. The last one was the blunt, "We can't keep living like this. Either you tell her, or I will." His stomach tightened as he read the words. For a moment he considered deleting the messages, pretending he hadn't seen them. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. Rachel was done waiting. That evening, the town would gather by the lake for the fireworks, and Rachel insisted he meet her there. She didn't want another whispered promise. She wanted a decision. James told himself he could control the situation, that he could calm her down, but deep down he knew control was slipping away. The affair had been built on secrecy and lies, and both were fragile things. With every passing day, the risk of exposure grew larger, and the consequences more unavoidable. Meanwhile, Claire went about the day unaware of what was unraveling in her husband's private life. She laughed with neighbors, arranged the food she had prepared, and fussed over details that seemed so important to her, but meaningless to James in that moment. He watched her moving around their home with practiced ease, feeling the weight of betrayal press down harder with each passing minute. He told himself that what he had with Rachel wasn't real, that it was only a mistake, but his actions told a different story. The afternoon parade came and went, leaving behind confetti in the streets and the echo of marching bands. As night drew closer, the town began to drift toward the lake, eager for the final event of the holiday. James walked alongside Claire and their son, but his mind was elsewhere, rehearsing what he might say, imagining Rachel waiting for him in the shadows. He knew he couldn't avoid her, not this time. She was determined, and her determination frightened him in a way he didn't want to admit. Labor Day was supposed to be a celebration of rest, of families, of community, but for James, it had become a deadline. Rachel had drawn a line in the sand, and by the end of the night, one way or another, his secret would no longer be his alone to carry. The night of the fireworks had always been one of Maplewood's proudest traditions, the kind of event that pulled the entire town to the lakeside park. Families spread out on picnic blankets, children ran with glow sticks in their hands, and couples sat shoulder to shoulder as the sky darkened. The air was alive with anticipation, the kind of collective excitement that made people forget about their worries, if only for an evening. But while most of the town focused on the colorful bursts soon to light the sky, James Miller's attention was elsewhere. He had promised Rachel he would meet her, and he knew the moment of confrontation was unavoidable. Claire Miller had noticed subtle changes in her husband over the past weeks. His distracted looks, his sudden silences, the way his phone never seemed far from reach. But she had brushed them aside as the stress of a new school year approaching. On that evening, however, as they sat together on the grass with their son, she could feel him growing restless. His gaze flicked constantly toward the edge of the crowd, his body tense as if waiting for something. When he finally stood and muttered an excuse about needing to stretch his legs, Claire's instincts sharpened. Without saying a word, she rose a few minutes later and followed. James made his way along the dimly lit path that curved around the lake. The sounds of laughter and chatter grew softer behind him, replaced by the gentle ripple of water against the shore. He moved quickly, his steps uneven, the weight of Rachel's ultimatum pressing against his chest. When he reached a small clearing by the dock, she was already there, standing in the shadows, her face lit faintly by the reflection of the moon on the water. Rachel looked different that night, her expression harder, her voice colder. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She wanted answers, and she wanted them now. From a distance, concealed in the trees, Claire saw what she had feared, but hadn't allowed herself to fully believe. Her husband was not alone. The intimacy of their posture, the way Rachel's hand reached for his arm, stripped away any chance of denial. Claire's breath caught in her throat, the festive atmosphere of the holiday vanishing in an instant. For a few moments she couldn't move, frozen by shock as the reality of betrayal unfolded before her eyes. Fireworks exploded overhead, vibrant reds and golds illuminating the sky, but to Claire they sounded distant, like hollow echoes over something much louder, the pounding of her heart. Back at the dock, James was trying to control the situation. He spoke in hushed tones, his hands moving in a nervous rhythm, as he tried to calm Rachel's rising anger. She accused him of cowardice, of stringing her along with empty promises. He insisted it wasn't so simple, that there were things she didn't understand. Each word he spoke only seemed to fuel her frustration. The tension hung heavy in the warm night air, the celebration just beyond the trees a cruel reminder of the life he was risking. Claire could no longer bear to watch. Without a sound, she turned and walked back the way she came, her steps quick and unsteady. She returned to the crowd, forcing her face into a mask of normalcy, as she sat once more beside her son. No one around her knew what she had just witnessed. No one could sense the storm building inside her. She smiled faintly when people spoke to her, nodded when someone offered her a sparkler, but her thoughts were far from the glowing sky above. In her mind, the image of her husband standing with another woman replayed again and again, each repetition sharper than the last. James, meanwhile, lingered at the dock until the fireworks ended, his conversation with Rachel unresolved. He had neither promised her the future she demanded nor broken things off cleanly. Instead, he left her with vague assurances, desperate to buy more time. But time was no longer on his side. Rachel's patience was gone, and Claire's silence was far more dangerous than he realized. When the last fireworks faded, and the crowd began to gather their belongings, the Miller family packed up in strained quiet. Claire said little, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. James sensed something was wrong but convinced himself she hadn't seen anything. He told himself he still had control, that the night had passed without consequence. But in Maplewood, whispers traveled fast, and secrets rarely stayed buried. The holiday that was supposed to mark the end of summer joy had instead opened the door to a season of suspicion, betrayal, and eventually tragedy. The night left behind more than smoke drifting over the lake. It left a fracture in the Miller family that would widen with each passing hour. James believed he had postponed the inevitable, but the truth was already in motion. Claire had seen everything, and nothing could erase that image from her mind. The last Labor Day was no longer about parades or fireworks. It had become the moment when a carefully built life began to collapse, and when the path toward tragedy could no longer be turned back. The morning after the fireworks, Maplewood woke slowly, the smell of barbecue smoke still clinging to the air, the sound of distant laughter from the night before, fading into memory. For most families, Labor Day had ended with joy and exhaustion, a final celebration of summer. But for the Miller household, the day began with a silence that felt unnatural, heavy, and cold. Claire moved through the kitchen as if on autopilot, setting out breakfast that no one truly touched. Her son noticed the tension but didn't ask questions, retreating into his own world, while James sat at the table, avoiding eye contact with the woman he had betrayed. He tried to act as though nothing had changed, but the atmosphere in the room betrayed him. Claire's quietness was sharper than words, her restrained movements louder than any argument. James left the house before noon, claiming he had errands to run. Claire watched him drive away, her thoughts unraveling like threads she could no longer hold together. She had spent the night turning over the image of him with Rachel by the lake. The way he leaned in close, the way Rachel's hand lingered on his arm. Her mind raced between disbelief, fury, and heartbreak. For years she had believed their marriage was solid, their lives built on trust. Now she realized she had been living in the shadow of a lie. The betrayal cut deeper, because it wasn't just about James. It was about the life she thought they had built together, the stability she had fought to preserve for their family. At the same time, Rachel was waiting restlessly in her small rental house, replaying the unresolved confrontation from the night before. She had pushed James hard, demanding clarity, but all she received was hesitation and vague words. He had told her to be patient, that things would work out soon, but patience was exactly what she no longer had. She felt humiliated, reduced to a secret in a town that barely knew her. Her determination grew sharper as the day dragged on, her anger simmering under the surface. If James would not make a choice, she would force one. By late afternoon, James returned to the lake, seeking solitude under the pretense of clearing his head. He parked his car near the trail and walked toward the water, the town behind him quieting into its usual rhythm. The lake, once a place of comfort from his childhood, now felt ominous. His thoughts were restless, torn between Rachel's demands and Claire's silence. He knew he could not keep both lives separate much longer. The walls were closing in. When he didn't come home for dinner, Claire's unease hardened into suspicion. At first she told herself he might be with a friend, or running an errand longer than expected, but deep down she knew where he was. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a dreadful certainty that he had gone back to her. The idea of him choosing Rachel over his family pushed Claire past the limits of reason. She left the house, got into her car, and drove toward the lake with a kind of focused determination she had never felt before. The scene she arrived to was far from calm. James was not alone. Rachel had come too, unwilling to wait any longer, and the two of them stood on the dock locked in a heated argument. Rachel's voice carried across the water, sharp and unforgiving, while James pleaded with her to lower it. He feared discovery, feared the very thing that was already happening, the truth unraveling under the open sky. Neither of them noticed the car pulling up, or the figure stepping out with clenched fists and burning eyes. Claire approached slowly, the weight of betrayal pressing on every step. For a brief moment she thought of turning back, of leaving him there with Rachel, and letting the consequences play out. But when she saw the two of them so close, saw the raw anger in Rachel's gestures and the fear on James's face, something inside her snapped. The confrontation was sudden, fierce, and fueled by months of lies and secrets that had finally erupted. Words flew between them, accusations, denials, half-truths. But the details would matter little in the end. By nightfall, the peaceful image of Maplewood's lake was shattered. James Miller was found lifeless near the dock, his body bearing the unmistakable signs of violence. The authorities were called, and the news spread across the small town like wildfire. At first, whispers leaned toward accident. Perhaps he had slipped into the water. Perhaps he had struck his head on the rocks. But those explanations unraveled quickly once investigators examined the scene. There were bruises inconsistent with a fall, and traces of a struggle etched into the ground. The town, still recovering from its holiday celebration, now found itself tangled in shock. A respected teacher, a family man, gone in a single night. Theories began to spread. Some said it was a jealous stranger, others speculated about old grudges. But the truth was far closer to home than anyone wanted to believe. Claire's silence and Rachel's fury were both now at the center of suspicion, and Maplewood was no longer the quiet, trusting community it had seemed just 24 hours earlier. The holiday that had begun with parades and fireworks had ended in death, and nothing in town would ever feel safe again. The days following James Miller's death were unlike anything Maplewood had experienced before. The town that once thrived on routine and familiarity found itself unsettled, whispers filling every corner. Teachers at the high school spoke in hushed tones, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, and even the usual morning gatherings at the diner grew tense, as speculation drowned out the clinking of coffee cups. Everyone had a theory, and no two were the same. Some believed James had been attacked by a stranger passing through town. Others insisted it was the result of a drunken fight gone wrong. But as investigators began piecing together the evidence, the picture of what really happened grew darker, and far more intimate. The autopsy revealed what many feared: James had not drowned, nor had he suffered an accidental fall. His body bore signs of a struggle, and bruising indicated blunt force trauma. It was undeniable now. His death had been the result of violence. Detectives retraced his steps, starting with his final hours at the lake. Witnesses remembered seeing his car parked by the trail, though no one recalled him leaving. A local fisherman reported hearing raised voices near the dock that evening. Though he couldn't make out the words, that small detail shifted the focus away from the theory of a stranger. This was no random act. This was personal. Attention turned quickly to Rachel Carter, the newcomer with a past shrouded in mystery. When detectives questioned her, she admitted to being at the lake that night. Her story, however, was carefully constructed. She explained that she and James had argued, but insisted she left him alive and angry, pacing by the water as she drove away. Her emotions were obvious. Her frustration, her bitterness. But there was no sign of guilt in her words. Still, her confession placed her at the scene, and that alone made her a prime suspect.